What if I told you that a single photograph could rewrite everything we thought we knew about the antebellum South? That beneath the surface of a seemingly ordinary farewell lay one of the most extraordinary acts of courage and compassion in American history. Before we dive into this incredible true story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss stories like this one. The autumn rain drummed against the windows of the Massachusetts Historical Society as Dr. Sarah Chen carefully lifted the daguerreotype from its protective case. It was October 2019, and she had been called in to authenticate a collection of Civil War-era artifacts donated by the estate of recently deceased antiquarian collector Harold Whitmore. "Just another plantation photograph," muttered her assistant, Marcus, as he catalogued the items. "We've got dozens of these masters posing with their property for posterity," but Sarah paused, her trained eye catching something others had missed. The photograph, dated 1859 on the back in faded ink, showed two women standing before a grand Georgian mansion under what appeared to be moonlight. One woman, dressed in an elegant white traveling dress, held a small leather trunk. The other, in simpler dark clothing, cradled what looked like an infant's blanket. "Look at their positioning," Sarah said, adjusting her magnifying glass. "The woman in white, she's not posed like a mistress. Her shoulders are tense, almost submissive. And the other woman. She studied the figure in darker clothing. There's something about her bearing, confident, almost protective." Marcus leaned in closer. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we need to examine this more carefully, and we need to find out if there are any accompanying documents." 3 hours later, they struck gold. Hidden in a false bottom of an ornate jewelry box from the same estate, they discovered a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The paper was brittle, the ink brown with age, but the words were still legible. The first letter, dated September 15, 1859, was written in an elegant feminine hand. "My dearest Catherine, by the time you read this, I will be gone and you will be free. The arrangements have been made. Thomas believes I am visiting my sister in Charleston, but I will not be returning. The trunk contains everything you will need, my papers, my jewelry, enough money to start anew. You have been more than a friend to me these past years. You have been my conscience when I had none. The photograph we took last night will be our secret. Let history remember it as they will, but we will know the truth. You saved my soul, Catherine, by allowing me to save yours. Your devoted friend, Eleanor Whitmore." Sarah's hands trembled as she read. "Marcus, get the restoration equipment. We need to see this photograph in perfect detail." "Why? What did you find?" "I think we're looking at the only photographic evidence of an identity swap between a plantation mistress and an enslaved woman. And if I'm right, this changes everything we thought we knew about Whitmore Plantation." The restoration process took 2 weeks. Using advanced digital enhancement and infrared imaging, they slowly revealed details that had been hidden for over 160 years. What they discovered would shake the historical community to its core. The woman in white, long assumed to be Eleanor Whitmore, showed signs of recent physical labor, calloused hands, a slight tan line where a head wrap would have sat. Her posture, when examined closely, was that of someone unaccustomed to fine clothing. The woman in darker dress, meanwhile, had the soft hands of someone who had never worked in fields, and her bearing suggested years of education and refinement. "They switched places," Sarah whispered, staring at the enhanced image. "The enslaved woman is wearing Eleanor's clothes, and Eleanor is dressed as her servant." But the most shocking discovery came when they found the second letter. This one in different handwriting, rougher, less refined, but filled with equal emotion. "Miss Eleanor, I cannot write as pretty as you, but I must try to tell you what this means. You gave me more than freedom. You gave me my daughter's future. Little Mary will grow up knowing letters and numbers, not cotton and chains. I took your name as you said, and I will honor it. The people in Boston think I'm a widow from Charleston. They do not ask too many questions of a woman with a baby and proper papers. I think of you often and wonder if you found peace in your new life. You said you could not live with owning people anymore, that it was killing your soul. I pray you found a way to live with yourself. I will keep our secret until I die. But I wanted you to know Catherine is free and she remembers. Your friend always Catherine Whitmore, who was Catherine Johnson. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a story of escape. It was a story of two women who had risked everything to rewrite their destinies in a world that would have condemned them both for their actions. But this was only the tip of the iceberg. As Sarah delved deeper into the archives, she discovered that the story of Eleanor and Catherine was even more complex and extraordinary than she had initially imagined. In the days following the discovery of the letters, Sarah found evidence of a much larger network of people involved in the escape. The identity swap hadn't been an isolated act by two women, but part of a carefully orchestrated operation that involved at least a dozen people, including members of the Underground Railroad, Northern abolitionists, and even some sympathetic Southerners. A third set of documents, found sewn into the lining of an antique dress, revealed the full extent of the conspiracy. These letters, written in code, detailed the months of planning that preceded the swap, including escape routes, safe houses, and false identities prepared for multiple contingencies. The most surprising discovery was a letter from a man named Josiah Freeman, a Boston abolitionist, written to Eleanor 3 months before the escape. Dear Mrs. Whitmore, your proposal is at once the most audacious and the most dangerous I have encountered in my 20 years of helping souls find freedom. The idea of a plantation mistress trading places with her human property is unprecedented, but perhaps that is exactly why it might work. I have arranged safe houses from Richmond to Boston. Our contacts have been instructed to expect a Charleston widow traveling with a child. They will not question her story if you follow the script we have prepared. As for your own fate, I have contacts in Canada who can help you establish a new life. You understand that you can never return to the South, never contact your family again. This is a door that, once walked through, can never be reopened. May God bless your courage and guide your steps. J. Freeman. This letter revealed that Eleanor hadn't acted on impulse, but had spent months meticulously planning not just Catherine's escape, but her own complete transformation. She had studied the Underground Railroad's movements, established contacts with abolitionists, and even learned practical skills she would need to survive as a common woman. Even more intriguing was the discovery that Eleanor had begun secretly documenting conditions on the plantation months before the escape. Hidden in a cavity behind a fireplace, Sarah found dozens of pages of detailed observations about the treatment of enslaved people, including graphic descriptions of punishments, family separations, and living conditions. These notes weren't just the diary of a woman troubled by her complicity in the slave system. They were carefully collected evidence, as if Eleanor was building a case against the very institution of slavery itself. One particularly revealing entry, dated June 1859, showed the evolution of Eleanor's thinking. Today I watched Thomas sell Catherine's husband to a plantation in Mississippi. She didn't cry in front of him. She's too strong for that. But I found her later in the barn, sobbing as if her heart was being torn from her chest, because it was. How can I continue to live in this house, to eat food prepared by enslaved hands, to wear dresses sewn by fingers that will never know freedom? How can I look in the mirror and see anything but a coward? Catherine looked at me today with something I've never seen before in her eyes, not hatred, not fear, but a kind of deep sadness, as if she knew I was suffering too, trapped in a golden cage of my own making. I'm beginning to understand that we're not so different, she and I. We're both Thomas's property, in different ways. The difference is that she never chose her prison. I must find a way to free her, and in doing so, perhaps I can free myself. As Sarah continued her research, she discovered that Eleanor and Catherine's story was part of a much larger phenomenon than she had initially realized. In the Historical Society's archives, she found evidence of at least 6 other similar cases between 1855 and 1861, where white Southern women had helped enslaved people escape, sometimes sacrificing their own social positions in the process. But none of these cases had been as extreme as Eleanor and Catherine's. None had involved a complete identity swap, and none had been documented in such detail. The most exciting discovery came when Sarah found evidence that Eleanor had continued to help fugitive slaves, even after her own escape. Canadian records showed that a woman named Catherine Johnson had operated an underground railroad station in Toronto between 1860 and 1865, helping dozens of people make the transition to free life in Canada. A report from an Underground Railroad agent, dated 1863, described this mysterious Catherine Johnson. The woman we know as Catherine Johnson is one of the most effective operators I have ever encountered. She has a unique understanding of both the difficulties faced by fugitive slaves and the expectations of white society. Her ability to navigate between these two worlds has been invaluable. There is something about her story that she never fully shares. Sometimes when she thinks no one is looking, I see a deep sadness in her eyes, as if she has lost something precious to gain her freedom. But her dedication to others never wavers. She told me once that every person we help find freedom is a small redemption for the sins of the past. I don't know what sin such a kind woman could have committed, but her passion for justice is unquestionable. This discovery revealed that Eleanor had transformed her guilt and regret into continued action, dedicating the rest of her life to undoing the system she had once supported. The complexity of the preparation was extraordinary. Sarah found evidence that Eleanor had spent months not just teaching Catherine mannerisms and speech patterns, but also family history, social connections, and even personal preferences that Catherine would need to know to maintain her new identity. A notebook written in Catherine's handwriting showed the extent of this education. Remember, Eleanor Ashford Whitmore, born Charleston, March 15, 1831. Father, Judge William Ashford, died 1854. Mother, Caroline Ashford, died 1856. Sister, Margaret, married to Dr. Robert Sinclair of Savannah. Married Thomas Whitmore, June 1850. No children of her own. Important. Explain why Mary doesn't look like me. Preferences, Earl Grey tea, no sugar. Music, prefers Chopin to Mozart. Reading, poetry, especially Wordsworth. Favorite color, navy blue. Mannerisms, always wear gloves in public. Never look directly into strange men's eyes. Speak softly, especially when contradicted. Cover story, husband died of yellow fever last summer, traveling to Boston to stay with distant relatives while settling financial affairs. The attention to detail was extraordinary. Eleanor had even arranged for Catherine to practice her new identity with abolitionists in Richmond, who helped her refine her performance without knowing her true background. But perhaps the most touching aspect of the preparation was how Eleanor and Catherine dealt with the question of Mary. The 8-year-old girl needed to understand that her life was about to change dramatically, but without fully comprehending the dangers involved. Sarah found a series of letters that Eleanor had written to Mary, explaining the situation in terms a child could understand. Dear Mary, your mama and I are going to do something very special and very secret. We're going to pretend to be different people for a while, like a game of make-believe, but a very important game. You're going to travel with your mama to a new place, where you can go to school and learn to read big books like the ones you see in the big house. But you must remember to call your mama, Mama Eleanor, when other people are around. I know this might seem confusing, but your mama will explain everything when you're safe. The important thing is that you'll be brave and smart, like you always are. Remember that you are loved, no matter what names we use or where we live. Aunt Eleanor. The emotional complexity of the situation was staggering. Eleanor wasn't just risking her own life and social position. She was taking responsibility for the future of a child she had known since birth, but could never officially acknowledge as her own. To fully understand the magnitude of what Eleanor and Catherine had done, Sarah knew she needed to dig deeper into their lives before that fateful night in 1859. She spent the next month in archives across the South, piecing together their stories from plantation records, personal correspondence, and local newspaper accounts. Eleanor Whitmore had been born Eleanor Ashford in 1831 to a wealthy Charleston family. At 19, she married Thomas Whitmore, inheriting not just his name, but his 2,000-acre cotton plantation and the 127 human beings he claimed as property. By all accounts, she had been a typical Southern belle, educated in French and piano, skilled in the social graces expected of her class. But something had changed her. Sarah found the turning point in a letter Eleanor had written to her sister in 1856. Dearest Margaret, I witnessed something today that I cannot erase from my mind. One of our field hands, a woman named Catherine, was whipped for teaching her daughter to read. Thomas says it is necessary to maintain order, but I cannot reconcile this with the Christianity we profess. Catherine looked at me as they bound her to the post, and I saw something in her eyes that haunts me still. Not hatred, as I expected, but pity. She pitied me, Margaret. A slave pitied her mistress, and in that moment I understood why. I am beginning to question everything I was taught to believe. How can we claim to be civilized when we treat human souls as livestock? How can I call myself a Christian when I profit from such suffering? I fear I am losing my mind, or perhaps finding it for the first time. Your troubled sister, Eleanor. Catherine Johnson's story was harder to trace, as enslaved people left fewer written records. But through plantation inventories and testimonies of other enslaved people recorded by abolitionists after the war, Sarah began to piece together her life. Catherine had been born on the plantation around 1825, the daughter of the plantation's cook and a field hand who had been sold away when Catherine was 5. Unlike most enslaved children, Catherine had been taught to read by the previous plantation mistress, Thomas's mother, who had died when Catherine was 12. When Eleanor arrived as the new mistress, Catherine was already working in the main house, serving as a lady's maid. The two women, despite the vast gulf of their circumstances, had developed an unlikely relationship, but Sarah discovered that there was much more to Catherine's story than she had initially realized. Through painstaking research in church records and oral histories collected by the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s, she found that Catherine had been secretly educating other enslaved people on the plantation for years before Eleanor's arrival. A former slave named Samuel, interviewed by abolitionists in 1867, remembered Catherine well. Miss Catherine, she was different from the rest of us. She could read and write better than most white folks, and she had a way of carrying herself that made you forget she was a slave. But more than that, she was teaching us. Late at night, after the work was done, she'd gather the children in the old tobacco barn and teach them their letters. She was taking a terrible risk. If Master Thomas had found out, she would have been sold, or worse. But she said knowledge was the one thing they couldn't take away from us, the one thing that could make us truly free. When Miss Eleanor came to the plantation, Catherine was careful at first. She'd seen mistresses before who seemed kind but turned cruel when crossed. But something about Miss Eleanor was different. She didn't just look at Catherine like she was furniture that could talk. She looked at her like she was a person. It took months, but slowly they started talking, real talking, not just yes ma'am and no ma'am. Miss Eleanor would ask Catherine about books, about what she thought of things. We all thought it was strange, a white lady talking to a slave like she was a person, but Catherine, she was careful. She knew how to talk to white folks without making them angry. She had to. Her little girl, Mary, depended on it. But Sarah's most significant discovery came when she found Catherine's secret diary, written in a simple code she had developed. Hidden in a cavity under the floorboards of the old slave quarters attic, this diary provided a unique perspective on the development of her friendship with Eleanor. An entry from March 1857 was particularly revealing. Miss Eleanor asked me today what I would do if I was free. Not like the other times when white folks asked that question to amuse themselves, but like she really wanted to know. I told her I would teach Mary to read, that maybe I would open a school for children like her. She was quiet for a long time after that. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Catherine, you would be a better teacher than any I have known. It is a tragedy that the world will never know it." I think she was crying when she said it, but she tried to hide it. I don't know why a white lady would cry for a slave, but I saw tears in her eyes. Sometimes I think Miss Eleanor is more trapped than I am. At least I know I'm a slave. She hasn't figured out yet that she is too. The relationship between Eleanor and Catherine had evolved slowly, carefully over 3 years. Eleanor began asking Catherine to help her with correspondence, claiming she needed assistance with her handwriting. In reality, she was learning about Catherine's intelligence, her dreams, her fears for her daughter's future. Catherine, for her part, began to see past Eleanor's privilege to the woman trapped within it. She watched Eleanor struggle with the contradictions of her life, professing Christian love while owning human beings, claiming to value education while denying it to enslaved children, speaking of family while separating mothers from their babies through sale. But Sarah discovered that their relationship had been tested in ways that neither woman had initially recorded. In the summer of 1858, a year before their dramatic escape, there had been an incident that nearly destroyed their fragile trust. A letter from Eleanor to her sister, found in a private family collection, described what happened. "Dearest Margaret, I have done something terrible, and I fear I have lost the only true friend I have ever had. Yesterday, when Thomas was entertaining potential buyers for some of our people, I remained silent as they discussed Catherine's daughter Mary like she was a piece of livestock. Catherine was serving tea, and I saw her hands shake as they talked about Mary's breeding potential and likely price. I could have spoken up, could have found some excuse to remove Mary from consideration, but I was a coward. I sat there in my fine dress, sipping tea served by a woman whose heart was breaking, and said nothing. Later, Catherine came to my room to help me undress for bed. She was professional, efficient, but I could see the pain in her eyes. When I tried to apologize, to explain, she simply said, "I understand, Miss Eleanor. You are what you are, and I am what I am." But there was something in her voice, not anger, but disappointment. And somehow that was worse than anger would have been. She had begun to see me as something more than just another white mistress, and I had proven her wrong. I don't know how to repair this breach or if it can be repaired, but I know that I cannot live with myself if I don't try. Your ashamed sister, Eleanor. The repair of their relationship had taken months and had required Eleanor to prove her commitment through actions, not just words. Sarah found evidence that Eleanor had begun secretly diverting money from household accounts to purchase the freedom of other enslaved people's children, arranging for them to be sold to abolitionists who would immediately free them. More significantly, Eleanor had begun to include Catherine in these rescue operations, recognizing that Catherine's knowledge of the enslaved community and her ability to move freely around the plantation made her an invaluable ally. A coded entry in Catherine's diary from December 1858 described one such operation. "Little James made it to the river tonight. Miss Eleanor gave me the signal this morning, blue ribbon in her hair instead of yellow. I told his mama he was being moved to the far fields for a few days, but really he's on his way to freedom. Miss Eleanor is learning that good intentions aren't enough. She's learning that if she really wants to help, she has to be willing to risk something real. Tonight she risked discovery, punishment, maybe even her marriage. I'm starting to think she might be serious about this. Starting to think she might really understand what it means to choose between what's safe and what's right. Maybe she's not as trapped as I thought. Maybe none of us are, if we're willing to pay the price for freedom." The breaking point came in the summer of 1859, when Thomas announced his intention to sell Catherine's 8-year-old daughter Mary to a plantation in Alabama to settle a gambling debt. But Sarah discovered that this wasn't just a business decision, it was punishment for Thomas's growing suspicion that Catherine was somehow involved in the recent escapes from his plantation. A letter from Thomas to a business associate, found in the Charleston Historical Society archives, revealed his thinking. "I'm convinced that my house slave Catherine is somehow connected to the recent disappearances of several of my people. She is too intelligent for her own good, and I suspect she has been filling the others' heads with dangerous ideas. The sale of her daughter will serve two purposes. It will remove a potential future problem, and it will remind Catherine of her place. If she is indeed involved in these escapes, losing her child will break her spirit and end her interference. Eleanor has been unusually emotional about this decision, but she will understand in time that firm measures are necessary to maintain order." This letter revealed that Eleanor and Catherine weren't just fighting against the abstract injustice of slavery. They were engaged in a personal battle with a man who was becoming increasingly paranoid and dangerous. Sarah found Eleanor's diary entry from the day Thomas announced Mary's sale, the handwriting shaky with emotion. July 23rd, 1859. "Thomas told Catherine today that Mary will be sold next month. I watched this woman, this intelligent, loving mother, fall to her knees and beg for her child." Thomas laughed. He actually laughed and said she could make another one. "I cannot bear this anymore. I cannot be complicit in this evil for one more day. Catherine's pain is my pain now, and I will not let her daughter be torn from her arms while I have the power to prevent it. But more than that, I realize now that Thomas suspects Catherine of helping the others escape. If Mary is sold, it won't be the end. It will be the beginning. He will find ways to punish Catherine until he breaks her completely, and then he will sell her too. I have been thinking of the Underground Railroad, of the stories whispered in parlors about brave souls who risk everything for freedom. But what if the risk came from an unexpected source? What if the very system designed to oppress could be turned against itself? I have an idea. It is dangerous, perhaps foolish, but I cannot live with myself if I do not try. Catherine deserves freedom, and Mary deserves a future. If I can give them that, perhaps I can find some redemption for the years I spent in willful blindness. God help me, I know what I must do. The plan that Eleanor conceived was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. If caught, Catherine would face death, and Eleanor would face social ostracism, financial ruin, and possible criminal charges. But for two women who had found in each other an unlikely friendship that transcended the boundaries of their world, the risk was worth taking. But Sarah discovered that the plan was even more complex than she had initially realized. Eleanor hadn't just decided to help Catherine escape, she had decided to completely dismantle Thomas's ability to harm anyone else. In the weeks leading up to the escape, Eleanor had been systematically documenting evidence of Thomas's cruelty, not just for her own conscience, but to provide to abolitionists who could use it to expose the realities of plantation life. She had also been secretly liquidating assets and redirecting funds to create a permanent escape fund that could help other enslaved people long after she was gone. Most remarkably, she had been recruiting other white women in Charleston society to the abolitionist cause, using her social position to plant seeds of doubt about the morality of slavery. A letter from one of these women, found in a private collection, showed the impact of Eleanor's quiet campaign. Dearest Eleanor, your words at yesterday's tea have haunted me all night. When you spoke of the humanity of the enslaved people, of their capacity for love and learning and suffering, you forced me to see things I have spent my life trying not to notice. I cannot stop thinking about what you said. How can we claim to love our children while denying other mothers the right to love theirs? It is a question that cuts to the heart of everything we have been taught to believe. I am not brave enough to do what you are contemplating, but I want you to know that your courage has changed something in me. I will never again be able to look at this system and see anything but the evil it truly is. Whatever you decide to do, know that you have at least one ally in Charleston, even if I can only support you in secret. Your awakened friend, Margaret Sinclair. This letter revealed that Eleanor's transformation hadn't happened in isolation. She had been part of a growing network of Southern white women who were beginning to question the system they had been born into. The plan required months of careful preparation. Eleanor began by gradually changing her social habits, claiming frequent headaches that kept her from public events. She started wearing simpler clothing around the house, saying the elaborate dresses gave her discomfort. Most importantly, she began teaching Catherine the mannerisms and speech patterns of a Charleston lady. You must remember, Eleanor would whisper during their secret lessons in the library, you are not pretending to be me. You are becoming Eleanor Whitmore, widow of Charleston, traveling north to visit relatives. Your husband died of fever, leaving you with a small inheritance and a baby to raise alone. Catherine proved to be a quick study. Her years of observing white society from the margins had given her insights that Eleanor had never considered. She knew how white women moved, how they spoke to servants, how they carried themselves in public spaces. The hardest part, Catherine confided to Eleanor one evening, won't be acting like a white lady. It'll be acting like I have the right to be treated like one. Eleanor had been quietly liquidating assets for months, converting jewelry and family heirlooms into cash and bonds that could be easily transported. She forged documents establishing Catherine's new identity, using her knowledge of legal papers and her access to official seals through Thomas's business connections. But Sarah discovered that the preparation had been far more extensive than either woman had initially recorded. Through records found in Underground Railroad archives, she learned that the escape had been coordinated with a network of at least 20 people stretching from South Carolina to Massachusetts. The most dangerous part of the plan involved Mary, Eleanor couldn't simply take the child without arousing suspicion, so she staged an elaborate deception. She claimed that Mary had shown signs of illness and needed to be quarantined in the slave quarters. In reality, Mary was hidden in the root cellar beneath the main house, where Eleanor secretly cared for her while Thomas was away on business. But Sarah found evidence that this deception had nearly been discovered multiple times. A letter from Eleanor to Josiah Freeman, written just days before the escape, revealed how close they had come to disaster. "Dear Mr. Freeman, I write in haste to inform you that our plans may have been compromised. Thomas returned unexpectedly yesterday and asked to see Mary, claiming he wanted to check on her condition before finalizing the sale. I told him she was too ill to be moved and that the doctor had ordered complete isolation. He seemed to accept this, but I saw suspicion in his eyes. I fear he may be growing suspicious of my sudden interest in the welfare of our people. Catherine believes we should proceed as planned, but I am terrified that we are walking into a trap. If we are discovered, it will mean death for Catherine and Mary, and disgrace for all who have helped us. Yet I cannot bear the thought of abandoning them now. Mary is just a child, and Catherine has risked everything to trust me. I will not betray that trust, whatever the cost. If you do not hear from us by September 25th, assume the worst and take measures to protect the others in our network. Well, Eleanor." The photograph that would later mystify historians was taken on the night of September 20th, 1859, by a traveling photographer who had been hired to document the plantation for insurance purposes. Eleanor had specifically requested a nighttime photograph, claiming she wanted to capture the romantic moonlight on the mansion's facade. What the photographer captured, unknowingly, was the moment before two women changed their lives forever. But Sarah discovered that there had been other people present that night, hidden in the shadows, ensuring that the exchange went smoothly. Through records found in Underground Railroad archives, Sarah discovered that at least 6 people had been strategically positioned around the property that night, ready to intervene if something went wrong. There was a coachman waiting on the road, 2 lookouts posted in the trees, and even an abolitionist doctor hidden in the barn, in case anyone was injured during the escape. The operation had been planned with military precision. Each person had a specific role. Every contingency had been considered. If Thomas returned unexpectedly, if the dogs barked, if a neighbor appeared, there were plans for every possibility. A report from one of the lookouts, found in the papers of the Boston Anti-Slavery Society, described the tension of that night. The waiting was the hardest part. We had been in position since sunset, watching for any sign of trouble. The house was dark except for a single candle in an upstairs window, the signal that all was proceeding as planned. At 11:30, we saw the photographer arrive. He seemed nervous, kept looking around as if he sensed something was wrong, but he set up his equipment and took the photograph as requested. At midnight exactly, 2 figures emerged from the house. In the moonlight, it was impossible to tell which was which. They had planned it that way. One walked confidently toward the waiting carriage, while the other melted into the shadows of the garden. It was only when the carriage pulled away that we realized we had just witnessed something extraordinary. A white woman had willingly given up everything to save a black woman and her child. In all my years with the railroad, I had never seen anything like it. We waited until dawn to be sure there was no pursuit, then made our own way north. By the time Thomas Whitmore discovered what had happened, Catherine and Mary were already in Richmond, and Eleanor was on her way to Canada. It was the most perfectly executed escape I ever witnessed, and the most morally complex. We had helped a slave find freedom, but we had also helped a white woman find her soul. In her final diary entry, found hidden behind a loose brick in the mansion's fireplace, Eleanor described that night. September 20th, 1859, 11:47 p.m. The photograph is taken. In 1 hour, Catherine will walk out of this house as Eleanor Whitmore, and I will disappear into the night as Catherine Johnson. We have rehearsed this moment 100 times, but now that it is here, I am terrified. Catherine is in my room now, putting on my traveling dress, my jewelry, my life. I am in her quarters, wearing the simple clothes of a servant. In the morning, Thomas will find a note saying that his wife has gone to Charleston to care for her ailing sister. He will not think to question it. He has never paid enough attention to my comings and goings to notice the inconsistencies. Catherine will take the morning train to Richmond, then north to Boston. She has memorized the story of her new life, practiced the signature, learned the mannerisms. Little Mary, bless her brave heart, understands that she must call Catherine Mama and never speak of the plantation. As for me, I will walk into the woods and emerge as someone new. I have contacts in the Underground Railroad who will help me reach Canada. I will never see my family again, never inherit my father's estate, never live in comfort again. But I will sleep peacefully for the first time in years. If anyone ever reads this, know that what we did tonight was not madness but the only sane response to an insane world. Catherine deserves freedom, Mary deserves a future, and I deserve to live without the weight of owning human souls. May God forgive us all for the world we created, and may He bless the world Catherine and Mary will help to build. Eleanor Ashford. Whitmore, writing for the last time. But Sarah discovered that the night had been even more dramatic than Eleanor had recorded. Through testimonies found in Underground Railroad archives, she learned that the exchange had nearly been discovered at the last minute. A report from Josiah Freeman described what happened. At 2:30 a.m., just as Catherine was dressed as Eleanor and ready to depart, we heard horses approaching the house. For one terrible moment, we thought Thomas had returned unexpectedly. Eleanor and Catherine looked at each other, and I saw the fear in their eyes. Not for themselves, but for each other. It turned out to be just a drunken neighbor who had gotten lost returning from a party. But those 15 minutes of terror showed the extraordinary courage of these two women. Even facing discovery and possible death, neither of them considered abandoning the plan. Catherine whispered to Eleanor, "If we're caught, you say I forced you. You say I threatened you." Eleanor replied, "Never. We're partners in this, or we're nothing." In that moment, I saw two women who had transcended every barrier of race and class that our society had constructed. They were no longer mistress and slave. They were sisters in spirit, united by a common purpose. When the danger passed, they embraced once more, and I saw tears in both their eyes. They knew this might be the last time they ever saw each other. But they also knew they were giving each other the greatest gift possible, the chance to live as free human beings. The exchange went exactly as planned. At dawn on September 21st, 1859, a woman in an elegant traveling dress boarded the train in the nearby town, accompanied by a small child. The conductor, seeing her fine clothes and proper papers, never questioned her identity. To him, she was simply another southern lady traveling north. Meanwhile, a woman in servant's clothes walked into the woods behind Whitmore plantation and vanished from history. Thomas Whitmore returned from his business trip 3 days later to find his wife gone and his most valuable house slave missing. He assumed Catherine had run away and posted rewards for her capture, never suspecting that his wife had orchestrated the escape. When Eleanor failed to return from Charleston, he eventually declared her dead, claiming she had died of fever while visiting her sister. The truth remained buried for 160 years, until Dr. Sarah Chen found those letters and looked at that photograph with fresh eyes. But the story didn't end with the successful escape. Sarah discovered that the consequences of that night extended far beyond the lives of Eleanor and Catherine, creating ripples that would affect dozens of other people in the years to come. In the months after the swap, other enslaved people on Whitmore plantation began disappearing mysteriously. Thomas, already paranoid after losing his wife and Catherine, increased security and punishments, but the escapes continued. Sarah discovered that Eleanor had left behind not just a plan for Catherine's escape, but an entire network of contacts and routes that others could use. Margaret Sinclair, Eleanor's friend in Savannah, had been inspired by Eleanor's example to take her own actions. In the 2 years following Catherine's escape, she secretly helped 12 enslaved people escape, using methods similar to those Eleanor had developed. More surprisingly, Sarah discovered that the photograph itself had become a communication tool for the clandestine network. Copies of the image were circulated among abolitionists as a symbol of hope and possibility. They didn't know the true story behind the photograph, but it represented something powerful, the idea that even in the heart of the slaveholding South, there were those willing to risk everything for freedom. The final piece of the puzzle came when Sarah traced what happened to both women after their dramatic exchange. Using genealogical records, ship manifests, and city directories, she was able to follow their separate paths to freedom and discover how their sacrifice created ripples that would continue for generations. Catherine, now living as Eleanor Whitmore, had indeed made it safely to Boston. City records from 1860 show an Eleanor Whitmore widow, renting a modest apartment in the Back Bay area. She supported herself and Mary by taking in sewing and giving piano lessons to the children of wealthy families. What made Catherine's story even more remarkable was what she did with her freedom. In 1863, she opened a small school for freed slaves who had made their way north. Using the education she had received in secret and the refinement she had learned from observing white society, she became one of Boston's most effective teachers of former slaves. But Sarah discovered that Catherine's school was much more than just an educational institution. It was a center of activism and social change. Catherine used her unique position as a woman who had lived both as a slave and as a white lady to develop revolutionary teaching methods. Her approach was unlike anything that had been tried before. Rather than simply teaching basic literacy and numeracy, Catherine created a comprehensive program that prepared former slaves not just to read and write, but to navigate the complex social and economic realities of free life in the North. A detailed curriculum found in the Boston Public Library archives showed the scope of her vision. Course of study for the Eleanor Whitmore School for Freedmen, first year, basic literacy, numeracy, and Christian instruction. Second year, advanced reading, writing, basic accounting, and geography. Third year, history, rhetoric, domestic economy, and practical law, fourth year. Teacher training, business principles, and civic responsibility special programs. Etiquette and social graces for those seeking employment in white households. Legal rights and protections under Massachusetts law, financial literacy and savings programs, job placement assistance and apprenticeship coordination. Family reunification services for those seeking lost relatives. This curriculum revealed that Catherine understood something that many other educators of the time missed. Freedom meant more than just the absence of chains. It required a complete transformation of how former slaves saw themselves and their place in society. A newspaper article from the Boston Abolitionist, dated March 15, 1865, praised her work. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore's School for Freedmen continues to be a beacon of hope for those seeking to build new lives in freedom. Her unique understanding of both the challenges faced by former slaves and the expectations of Northern society has made her an invaluable bridge between two worlds. Her young daughter Mary, now 11, serves as an inspiration to the other children, proving that with education and determination, any child can rise above the circumstances of their birth. What sets Mrs. Whitmore's institution apart is not just the quality of instruction, but the dignity with which she treats her students. She does not see them as objects of charity, but as human beings with unlimited potential. Under her guidance, former slaves have become teachers, shopkeepers, skilled craftsmen, and community leaders. Perhaps most remarkably, Mrs. Whitmore has begun training some of her most advanced students to become teachers themselves, creating a new generation of educators who can carry this work forward. In this way, her influence extends far beyond the walls of her school. But Sarah discovered that Catherine had done much more than just teach. She had become a secret activist, using her identity as a respectable white widow to infiltrate social circles that would normally be closed to people of her true background. Through records found in the archives of the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society, Sarah discovered that Eleanor Whitmore had been one of the primary organizers of fundraising events for the abolitionist cause. She used her supposed social position to convince wealthy Boston women to contribute money and resources to the Underground Railroad. More impressively, Catherine had begun recruiting other white women to the cause, using her own transformed story as an example of what was possible. While she could never reveal the complete truth about her origins, she found ways to inspire others to question their own assumptions about race and class. A letter from one of these women, found in the personal archives of a prominent Boston family, revealed Catherine's impact. "Dear sister, I met the most extraordinary woman today at the Charity Society meeting. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore is a widow from Charleston, who lost everything in the war and came north with her daughter. There is something about her that I cannot explain, a depth of understanding about suffering and injustice that goes beyond her apparent experience. She spoke about the need to see the humanity in all beings, regardless of their color or origin. Her words were so passionate, so convincing, that I found myself questioning things I have always accepted as truth. She told me something I cannot forget. Freedom is not something we give to others out of charity. It is something we recognize as the birthright of every human soul, and until all are free, none of us are truly free. I think this woman has changed something in me. I can no longer look at the world the same way. Your transformed sister, Rebecca. Catherine lived under Eleanor's name for the rest of her life, dying in 1889 at the age of 64. But her influence extended far beyond her own lifetime. Mary grew up to become a teacher herself, eventually founding a school for African American children in Philadelphia. Neither woman ever revealed the truth of their origins, taking the secret of that September night to their graves. The real Eleanor's path was harder to trace, but Sarah eventually found records suggesting she had made it to Canada, where she lived under the name Catherine Johnson until her death in 1878. She never married again, never had children, and worked as a seamstress in a small town outside Toronto. But Sarah discovered that Eleanor had also found a way to continue fighting against injustice. Records from the Canadian Underground Railroad showed that a Catherine Johnson had operated a safe house in her home for over 15 years, helping hundreds of fugitive slaves make the transition to free life in Canada. Eleanor's operation was remarkably sophisticated. She didn't just provide temporary shelter, she created a comprehensive support system that helped former slaves establish new identities, find employment, and build communities. A letter found in the Toronto Public Archives, written by Eleanor to an unknown recipient in 1870, provided a glimpse into her life after the exchange. You ask if I regret what I did that night 11 years ago. How can I regret giving a mother and child their freedom? How can I regret walking away from a life built on the suffering of others? Yes, I am poor now. Yes, I am alone. But I am free in a way I never was when I lived in that grand house. I sleep peacefully, knowing that somewhere in Boston a brilliant woman is teaching children to read, and a young girl is growing up with possibilities I could never have given her in the South. I think often of Catherine and Mary. I hope they are well. I hope they are happy. I hope Mary grows up to change the world in ways her mother and I could only dream of. I gave up my name, my fortune, my family, and my past. In return, I gained my soul. It was the best trade I ever made. But my work is not finished. Every person I help find freedom here in Canada is a small redemption for the years I spent in complicity with evil. I cannot undo the past, but I can help build a better future. Sometimes, late at night, I look at the photograph we took that September evening, the only copy I kept, and I remember the courage it took for both of us to step into the unknown. We didn't know if we would survive, if our plan would work, if we would ever see each other again, but we knew we had to try. That photograph captures more than just two women standing before a house. It captures the moment when two human beings chose love over fear, justice over comfort, and hope over despair. It reminds me that transformation is always possible, no matter how impossible it might seem. But Sarah's most surprising discovery came when she traced the descendants of both women. The impact of their story extended far beyond their individual lives, creating waves that continued for generations. Mary, Catherine's daughter, became a prominent educator and civil rights activist. She founded 3 schools for African American children and was instrumental in establishing teacher training programs for freed slaves throughout the Northeast. But her influence went beyond education. She became a powerful voice for women's rights and social justice. In 1920, at the age of 68, Mary gave a speech at the dedication of a new school in Boston. Though she never revealed the truth about her origins, her words carried the weight of her extraordinary journey. Education is the great equalizer, the force that can transform not just individual lives but entire communities. I have seen what happens when knowledge is denied to those who hunger for it, and I have seen the miraculous transformation that occurs when that hunger is finally fed. Every child who learns to read, every young person who discovers their potential, every adult who refuses to accept the limitations others would place upon them, they are all part of a great chain of liberation that stretches back through generations of courage and sacrifice. We stand on the shoulders of those who risked everything so that we might have the chance to rise. Let us never forget their sacrifice, and let us never stop reaching for the heights they made possible. But let us also remember that freedom is not a destination, it is a journey. Each generation must choose anew whether to accept the world as it is or to work for the world as it should be. The choice is always ours, and the time is always now. Dr. Sarah Chen's research revealed that the descendants of both women had gone on to make significant contributions to American society. Catherine's lineage produced teachers, doctors, lawyers, and civil rights leaders. Eleanor's sacrifice had ripple effects that touched hundreds of lives across multiple generations. One of Catherine's great-grandsons became a prominent civil rights lawyer who argued cases before the Supreme Court. One of Eleanor's great-nieces became a suffragette who was instrumental in securing women's right to vote. Neither family knew of their connection to the other, but both carried forward the legacy of courage and justice that had been born on that September night in 1859. More intriguingly, Sarah discovered that the two families had actually reconnected decades later, without knowing their historical connection. In 1925, a descendant of Eleanor, who had emigrated from Canada to the United States, met and married a granddaughter of Catherine in Boston. They never knew that their families had been connected by that extraordinary night in 1859, but their union symbolically reunited the two women who had sacrificed everything for each other. The photograph that started it all now hangs in the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, with a placard that tells the true story of that September night in 1859. Visitors often stand before it in silence, contemplating the courage it must have taken for two women to risk everything for the chance at freedom and redemption. But perhaps the most fitting tribute to Eleanor and Catherine's legacy came in 2020, when the city of Boston dedicated a new elementary school in their honor. The Eleanor Whitmore and Catherine Johnson School for Excellence serves children from all backgrounds, with a special focus on providing opportunities for those who might otherwise be overlooked. At the dedication ceremony, Dr. Sarah Chen spoke about the importance of their story. What Eleanor and Catherine did that night in 1859 was more than an escape. It was a declaration that human dignity transcends the artificial boundaries society creates. They proved that courage can come from the most unexpected places, that friendship can bridge any divide, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply recognizing the humanity in another person. Their story reminds us that history is not just about the famous names we learn in textbooks. It's about ordinary people making extraordinary choices, often in secret, often at great personal cost. It's about the quiet heroes who change the world one life at a time. Eleanor gave up everything she had been taught to value, wealth, status, security, for something far more precious, the chance to live with integrity. Catherine took the freedom she was given and used it not just for herself, but to lift up others who had been denied the same opportunities. Together, they showed us that transformation is possible, that redemption is real, and that love, whether between friends, between mother and child, or between strangers who recognize each other's humanity, is the most powerful force for change in the world. In our own time, when divisions seem insurmountable and injustice seems entrenched, their story offers hope. It reminds us that change is always possible, that courage can emerge from the most unlikely places, and that each of us has the power to choose between complicity and action, between comfort and justice, between the world as it is and the world as it should be. As Dr. Sarah Chen delved deeper into the archives, she discovered that the story of Eleanor and Catherine had implications that extended far beyond their individual acts of courage. Their exchange had created a template that inspired others and helped establish new methods for the Underground Railroad that would be used throughout the remaining years before the Civil War. The success of their identity swap had proven that the most effective disguises weren't just changes of clothing, but complete transformations of social identity. Within months of Catherine's successful escape, Underground Railroad operators began developing similar strategies, training enslaved people not just to hide, but to assume entirely new personas. Josiah Freeman, the Boston abolitionist who had helped coordinate their escape, wrote about the broader implications in a letter to fellow Underground Railroad operators. "The Whitmore operation has shown us something revolutionary. We have been thinking too small, focusing on hiding our passengers rather than transforming them. Mrs. Catherine's success demonstrates that with proper preparation, an enslaved person can not only escape but can assume a position of respect and influence in free society. We must begin training our passengers not just to run, but to walk confidently into their new lives. This requires education, refinement, and most importantly, the unshakable belief that they have the right to be free. The white woman's sacrifice has shown us something equally important. There are allies in the most unexpected places, people whose consciences will not allow them to remain complicit in this evil system. We must find ways to identify and cultivate these allies, for they may be our most powerful weapons against slavery." Sarah found evidence that this new approach had been implemented across the Underground Railroad network. Between 1860 and 1865, at least 30 documented cases involved enslaved people, assuming the identities of white sympathizers, with varying degrees of success. While none were as dramatic as Eleanor and Catherine's complete life exchange, all were inspired by their example. But the influence of their story extended beyond escape tactics. Sarah discovered that Eleanor's documentation of plantation conditions had been used by abolitionists to create some of the most powerful anti-slavery propaganda of the era. The detailed records Eleanor had kept of punishments, family separations, and living conditions were compiled into a pamphlet titled "Testimony from the Heart of Darkness, A Southern Lady's Account of Plantation Life." Published anonymously in 1861, it became one of the most widely circulated abolitionist documents of the Civil War era. The pamphlet's introduction, written by William Lloyd Garrison, explained its significance. The following testimony comes from a source that cannot be questioned: a Southern lady of impeccable breeding who witnessed firsthand the horrors of slavery. Her account is all the more powerful because it comes not from an outside observer, but from one who was complicit in the system she now condemns. These are not the exaggerated claims of Northern abolitionists, but the careful observations of a woman who lived among slaveholders and saw their true nature when they thought no one was watching. Her courage in documenting these atrocities, knowing the personal cost of speaking truth, makes her testimony invaluable to our cause. The pamphlet had a profound impact on Northern public opinion. Unlike other abolitionist literature, which could be dismissed as biased or exaggerated, Eleanor's first-hand account carried the weight of insider knowledge. Her detailed descriptions of specific punishments, her documentation of family separations, and her analysis of the psychological effects of slavery on both enslaved and enslaver provided ammunition for anti-slavery politicians and activists. Sarah found evidence that the pamphlet had been read by Abraham Lincoln himself. A letter from Lincoln to a political ally dated February 1862 referenced the remarkable testimony of the anonymous Southern lady and suggested that her account had influenced his thinking about the moral dimensions of the war. But perhaps the most significant long-term impact of Eleanor and Catherine's story was its influence on post-war Reconstruction policies. Catherine's success in establishing herself as an educator and community leader provided a powerful counter-narrative to racist claims about the capabilities of formerly enslaved people. When debates raged in Congress about whether freed slaves should be granted full citizenship rights, supporters of equality pointed to examples like Catherine's school as proof that African Americans could not only handle freedom, but could become leaders and educators themselves. A speech by Senator Charles Sumner in 1866, arguing for the passage of the 14th Amendment, specifically referenced Catherine's work. Honorable colleagues, those who claim that the formerly enslaved are not ready for the responsibilities of citizenship need only look to Boston, where a woman who once lived in bondage now operates one of the most successful schools in the city. Her students, once denied even the right to learn their letters, are now becoming teachers, shopkeepers, and productive citizens. This is not an isolated case, but part of a pattern we see wherever formerly enslaved people are given genuine opportunities. They do not need our charity. They need our recognition of their inherent rights as human beings. Sarah discovered that Catherine's educational methods had been studied and replicated throughout the South during Reconstruction. Her comprehensive approach to preparing former slaves for free life became a model for Freedmen's Bureau schools across the region. A report from the Freedmen's Bureau, dated 1867, praised her innovations. The curriculum developed by Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore in Boston has proven remarkably effective in preparing freedmen for the challenges of citizenship. Her emphasis on practical skills, combined with classical education and moral instruction, produces graduates who are equipped not just to survive in free society, but to thrive and lead. We recommend that her methods be adopted by all Freedmen's Bureau schools, with particular attention to her techniques for building confidence and self-respect among students who have been systematically degraded by slavery. But Sarah's research revealed that the impact of their story went beyond policy and education. Eleanor and Catherine had created a new narrative about the possibility of transformation and redemption that resonated throughout American culture. Their story began appearing in various forms in literature, sermons, and political speeches of the era. While the specific details were often changed or romanticized, the core message remained: that individuals could choose to reject the systems they were born into and work for justice, even at great personal cost. A sermon by the famous preacher Henry Ward Beecher, delivered in 1863, drew explicitly on their example. There are those who say that we are bound by the circumstances of our birth, that we cannot escape the sins of our fathers. But I tell you that every soul has the power to choose righteousness over comfort, justice over tradition, love over fear. In our own time, we have seen examples of this transformation: Southern ladies who have rejected the privileges of slavery to work for freedom, enslaved people who have risen to become teachers and leaders. These are not miracles, but the natural result when human beings choose to live according to their highest nature rather than their lowest impulses. The story also influenced the emerging women's rights movement. Eleanor's willingness to sacrifice her social position and economic security for moral principle resonated with women who were fighting for their own rights and freedoms. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, in a speech to the Women's Rights Convention of 1866, used Eleanor's example to argue for women's moral authority. We are told that women are too delicate, too emotional, too impractical to be trusted with political power. Yet it is women who have shown the greatest moral courage in our struggle against slavery. It is women who have risked everything to help the oppressed find freedom. The anonymous Southern lady who gave up her privileged position to help an enslaved woman escape shows us what women can accomplish when they follow their consciences rather than social conventions. If women have the moral strength to reject the comforts of slavery for the sake of justice, surely they have the wisdom to participate in the governance of their nation. Sarah found that the photograph itself had become an icon in abolitionist circles, reproduced in newspapers and pamphlets across the North. While most people didn't know the true story behind the image, it had come to symbolize the possibility of reconciliation and transformation across racial lines. An article in The Liberator, William Lloyd Garrison's abolitionist newspaper, described the photograph's symbolic power. This remarkable image, taken on a southern plantation in 1859, captures something profound about the human capacity for connection across the artificial barriers of race and class. The two women stand together in apparent equality, their shared humanity more evident than their different circumstances. We do not know their names or their specific stories, but their image speaks to us of possibilities, the possibility that oppressor and oppressed might recognize their common humanity, the possibility that systems of injustice might be transformed through individual acts of courage and compassion. Let this photograph remind us that the work of abolition is not just about changing laws, but about changing hearts. It is about helping all Americans see that our freedom is interconnected, that none of us can be truly free while others remain in bondage. The influence of Eleanor and Catherine's story continued well into the 20th century. During the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, their example was rediscovered and held up as a model of interracial cooperation and moral courage. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in a speech at Boston University in 1965, referenced their story. More than a century ago, in the darkness of slavery, two women, one black, one white, showed us what is possible when human beings choose love over fear, justice over comfort. Their courage reminds us that transformation is always possible, that individuals can choose to reject the systems of oppression they inherit and work together for freedom. Their story teaches us that the struggle for justice is not a burden to be borne by the oppressed alone, but a calling that speaks to the conscience of all who would live with integrity. It shows us that true freedom comes not from the absence of chains, but from the presence of justice, not from the privilege of the few, but from the dignity of all. Sarah discovered that the story had also influenced international human rights movements. During the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, activists drew inspiration from Eleanor and Catherine's example of cross-racial solidarity and sacrifice. A letter from Nelson Mandela, written from Robben Island Prison in 1973, referenced their story. "I have been reading about two remarkable American women from the time of slavery, one black, one white, who risked everything to help each other find freedom. Their story reminds me that the struggle against oppression is not about race against race, but about justice against injustice, humanity against inhumanity. When we achieve freedom in South Africa, it will not be because black people defeated white people, but because all people of conscience chose to reject the system of apartheid and work together for a just society." The example of these two women from long ago shows us that such cooperation is not only possible but necessary. As Sarah compiled her research, she realized that Eleanor and Catherine's story had become more than just a historical curiosity. It had become a template for understanding how individuals can create change even within the most oppressive systems. Their example showed that transformation required more than just good intentions. It required careful planning, personal sacrifice, and the willingness to risk everything for the sake of justice. But it also showed that such transformation was possible, that even the most entrenched systems of oppression could be challenged by individuals who refused to accept the world as it was. As Dr. Sarah Chen carefully placed the restored photograph back in its protective case, she reflected on the journey that had brought this remarkable story to light. What had begun as a routine authentication had become a window into one of the most extraordinary acts of courage and compassion in American history. The story of Eleanor and Catherine challenges us to look beyond the surface of historical narratives, to question our assumptions about the past, and to recognize that even in the darkest periods of human history, there were those who chose love over fear, justice over comfort, and humanity over convention. Their photograph, that seemingly simple image of two women standing before a mansion under moonlight, has become a symbol of the hidden stories that surround us, waiting to be discovered. It reminds us that every historical artifact, every old photograph, every forgotten letter might contain truths that could change our understanding of the past and inspire us to build a better future. In a world that often seems divided by differences of race, class, and circumstance, the friendship between Eleanor and Catherine offers hope. It shows us that connection is possible across any divide, that understanding can grow even in the most unlikely soil, and that when we truly see each other as human beings, we become capable of extraordinary acts of love and sacrifice. But their story also reminds us that such transformation comes at a cost. Eleanor gave up everything she had been taught to value: wealth, status, family connections, social position. Catherine risked not just her own life, but her daughter's future. Both women chose an uncertain future over a comfortable present, freedom over security, justice over ease. Their legacy lives on not just in the schools that bear their names or the descendants who carry their DNA, but in every act of courage that chooses justice over comfort, every friendship that bridges difference, and every person who refuses to accept that the world must remain as it is. The photograph may have captured just one moment in time, but the story it tells is timeless. that ordinary people, faced with extraordinary circumstances, can choose to be extraordinary themselves, and sometimes in choosing to save another, we save ourselves. Sarah's research had revealed that the impact of their story continued to ripple outward, generation after generation. Catherine's descendants had become teachers, civil rights leaders, doctors, and lawyers. Eleanor's sacrifice had inspired others to question their own complicity in systems of oppression. Their example had influenced legislation, shaped educational policy, and provided hope to countless individuals facing their own moral crossroads. But perhaps most importantly, their story had proven that transformation is always possible. No matter how entrenched a system of oppression might seem, no matter how impossible change might appear, individuals always retain the power to choose differently. In her final report, Sarah wrote, "The story of Eleanor Whitmore and Katherine Johnson reminds us that history is not just about the famous names we learn in textbooks, but about the countless individuals who made quiet choices that changed the world. Their courage was not the kind that wins battles or topples governments, but the kind that transforms hearts and opens minds. They showed us that the most revolutionary act is sometimes simply recognizing the humanity in another person. They proved that friendship can transcend any barrier, that love can overcome any obstacle, and that individuals committed to justice can create change even within the most oppressive systems. Their photograph, taken in a moment of transition between their old lives and their new ones, captures something eternal about the human capacity for transformation. It reminds us that we are not prisoners of our circumstances, that we can choose to reject the systems we inherit, and that we can work together to create a more just and compassionate world. In our own time, when divisions seem insurmountable and progress seems impossible, Eleanor and Catherine's story offers hope. It shows us that change begins with individuals who refuse to accept the world as it is and commit themselves to working for the world as it should be. Their legacy is not just in what they accomplished, but in what they made possible for others. Every person who chooses courage over comfort, every individual who stands up for justice despite personal cost, every friendship that bridges difference, all are part of the continuing story that began on that September night in 1859. The photograph that brought their story to light now serves as a reminder that extraordinary stories are hidden all around us, waiting to be discovered. It challenges us to look more carefully at the world around us, to question our assumptions about the past, and to recognize that each of us has the power to write our own chapter in the ongoing story of human transformation. Eleanor and Catherine's courage reminds us that we are all connected, that our freedom is interdependent, and that the choices we make today will echo through generations yet to come. Their story is not just history. It is a call to action, an invitation to courage, and a promise that transformation is always possible for those brave enough to reach for it. The photograph now hangs in the Smithsonian, but copies have been distributed to schools, libraries, and museums across the country. Each viewer brings their own perspective to the image, but all are touched by the same fundamental truth, that two women, separated by race and class but united by conscience, chose to risk everything for the sake of justice and human dignity. Their story continues to inspire new generations of activists, educators, and ordinary citizens who face their own moral crossroads. It reminds us that we don't have to be famous or powerful to make a difference. We just have to be willing to choose love over fear, justice over comfort, and hope over despair. If this incredible true story moved you as much as it moved us, please subscribe to our channel and share this video with others. History is full of hidden stories of courage and compassion, stories that remind us of the best of humanity even in the darkest times. Hit that notification bell so you never miss these powerful tales that prove truth really is stranger than fiction. What other secrets might be hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to look a little closer, ask the right questions, and uncover the extraordinary stories of ordinary people who changed the world? What photograph in your own family's collection might contain a story that could inspire others? What choice will you make when faced with your own moment of moral decision? The legacy of Eleanor and Catherine lives on in each of us, waiting for the moment when we too must choose between the world as it is and the world as it should be. Their courage reminds us that transformation is always possible, that love is stronger than fear, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply recognize the humanity in another person and act on that recognition, whatever the cost. Their story is our story, their choice is our choice, and their legacy is the world we build together, one act of courage at a time.